Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the discovery was learning how close Lisa had come to being rescued. The search teams had passed within 100 yards of the concealed shaft multiple times, calling her name and looking for any sign of her presence. But with the access panel partially collapsed and sealed with debris, her voice couldn't reach them, and they had no reason to suspect that such a hazard existed in that location. Detective Johnson noted the cruel irony of the situation. Lisa had died roughly the same distance from Eagle's Rest campsite as the length of a football field. If the search teams had known to look for abandoned government installations, or if better records had been kept of the monitoring well locations, she might have been found alive. The discovery led to immediate action by Forest Service officials. They launched a comprehensive survey of all historical government installations in national forests across the country, working to identify and properly seal any similar hazards that might still exist. The survey revealed 17 other abandoned monitoring shafts in various stages of concealment and decay. Lisa's death, while finally solving the mystery of her disappearance, highlighted serious problems with institutional memory and record-keeping in government agencies. Critical safety information had been lost over the decades, creating invisible dangers that put public safety at risk. Her family found some comfort in finally having answers, though the knowledge of her prolonged survival underground added a heartbreaking dimension to their grief. Jenny established a foundation in Lisa's memory, dedicated to improving wilderness safety protocols and ensuring that abandoned government infrastructure in public lands is properly documented and secured. The Foundation's work has already prevented similar tragedies by identifying and sealing dangerous abandoned installations before they can harm anyone else. In this way, Lisa's dedication to protecting others continues even after her death, turning a personal tragedy into a force for positive change that makes the wilderness safer for future generations. The Eagle's Rest area has returned to its natural state, with wildlife slowly returning to normal patterns. The oppressive silence that had marked the area since Lisa's disappearance has lifted, as if the forest itself found peace when her fate was finally discovered and her remains were properly laid to rest. May 2023 brought the kind of perfect spring weather that draws people deep into the forest. The snow had melted, wildflowers were blooming, and the trails were dry and safe for hiking. It was exactly the kind of day that Lisa would have loved, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze rustling through the pine trees. Two experienced hikers named Tom and Rachel were exploring a section of unofficial trail about 2 miles southeast of Eagle's Rest campsite. They had been hiking together for over 15 years and knew these woods almost as well as the rangers did. They often ventured off the marked trails to discover hidden waterfalls, scenic overlooks, and quiet spots where few people ever went. On this particular morning, they had been following an old deer path that wound along a seasonal creek. The water was running high from spring snowmelt, creating small waterfalls and pools that sparkled in the morning sunlight. They stopped frequently to take photos and simply enjoy the peaceful sounds of running water and bird songs. Around mid-morning, they decided to take a break on a fallen log near the creek. Rachel was adjusting her backpack when she noticed something that didn't look quite right. Among the thick layer of fallen leaves and forest debris, she could see what appeared to be a straight edge, something too geometric to occur naturally in the forest. Tom initially thought it might be a piece of trash that someone had dropped, maybe part of a camping chair or hiking equipment. But as they cleared away the accumulated leaves and organic matter, they realized they were looking at something much more significant and mysterious. Under several years' worth of decomposed leaves, pine needles, and forest debris, they uncovered a metal panel about 3 feet square. The metal was heavily rusted and corroded, but they could still make out faded markings that looked like government stamps or identification numbers. The panel appeared to be some kind of access cover or hatch. Rachel pulled out her phone to take pictures, though she knew there was no cell service in this remote area. Something about the discovery felt important, and she wanted to document it carefully. Tom used a stick to clear more debris from around the edges of the metal panel, trying to understand what they had found. As they worked, it became clear that the panel was designed to be removed, though it looked like it hadn't been disturbed. for many years. The edges were sealed with accumulated dirt and organic matter, and the metal had partially fused with the surrounding soil due to years of weather and corrosion. Tom managed to pry up one corner of the panel using a sturdy branch. As a lever, immediately they could see that there was empty space underneath. This wasn't just a decorative cover or buried piece of equipment. It was an access panel covering some kind of shaft or opening that went down into the ground. Using the flashlight app on Rachel's phone, they tried to peer into the opening. The light revealed what appeared to be a concrete-lined shaft descending straight down into darkness. They could see the remains of a metal ladder attached to one wall, though much of it had rusted away over the years. Most shocking of all, about 20 feet down at the bottom of the shaft, their light reflected off something that made both hikers gasp in recognition. Even in the dim light from Rachel's phone, they could clearly see the distinctive uniform of a park ranger. Tom and Rachel looked at each other in stunned silence. They both immediately thought of Lisa, the ranger who had disappeared almost 2 years earlier. Everyone in the hiking community knew her story, and many people had spent time searching for any trace of what might have happened to her. Rachel's hands were shaking as she tried to get a better look with her phone's flashlight. The beam wasn't strong enough to illuminate much detail, but they could definitely see human remains wearing what appeared to be a complete ranger uniform. There were also scattered pieces of equipment visible in the narrow space, a backpack, what might have been a radio, and other items they couldn't identify clearly. The hikers realized they were looking at a potential crime scene and needed to be very careful about disturbing anything. Tom immediately began marking the location with bright-colored hiking tape tied to nearby trees, creating a trail that would allow authorities to find the spot easily. Rachel tried her phone several times, hoping to pick up even a weak signal that would allow them to call for help immediately, but they were too far from any cell towers, and their satellite communicator was back in their car. They would have to hike out to report their discovery. The hike back to their vehicle felt longer than usual, even though they were moving as quickly as safety allowed. Both hikers were quiet, processing what they had found and thinking about Lisa's family and friends who had been searching for answers for so long. As soon as they reached an area with cell phone coverage, Rachel called 911 to report the discovery. The dispatcher initially seemed skeptical about their story, but when they mentioned finding what appeared to be a missing park ranger, the tone of the conversation changed immediately. Within hours, the forest was filled with emergency vehicles, investigators and specialized recovery teams. Detective Johnson, who had never stopped thinking about Lisa's case, was among the first officials to reach the scene. For him, this discovery represented the potential end to a mystery that had consumed nearly 2 years of his professional life. The recovery operation was complex and dangerous. The shaft was narrow, unstable, and had been sealed for years. Specialized equipment had to be brought in to safely extract the remains and preserve any evidence that might explain what had happened. When the recovery was complete, investigators confirmed what Tom and Rachel had suspected. The remains were indeed those of Lisa, still wearing her complete ranger uniform and surrounded by her missing equipment. Her radio, backpack, first aid kit, and other gear were all present in the narrow space at the bottom of the shaft. The discovery answered the question of what had happened to Lisa, but it also raised new questions about how such a dangerous hazard could have existed undetected in a public forest for so many years. Investigation into the shaft's history revealed a disturbing story of government bureaucracy and forgotten records. The concrete shaft was part of an abandoned geological monitoring project from the 1960s. During that era, the government had installed a network of deep monitoring wells throughout national forests to study groundwater and geological conditions. The project had been discontinued in the early 1970s, and most of the monitoring sites were supposed to have been properly sealed and marked. However, incomplete records and poor communication between different government agencies meant that some sites were never properly decommissioned. This particular shaft had been abandoned and forgotten, with only a metal access panel to mark its location. Over the decades, natural forest processes had gradually concealed the panel under layers of organic debris. The investigation revealed that the access panel had been weakened by years of weather and corrosion. When Lisa stepped on it during her patrol in October 2021, it gave way under her weight, sending her plummeting 20 feet down into the narrow concrete shaft. Lisa's personal notebook, miraculously preserved in the dry conditions at the bottom of the shaft, provided heartbreaking details about her final days. Her handwritten entries, illuminated by flashlight, showed that she had survived the fall with serious injuries, but remained conscious and alert for several days. She had attempted repeatedly to climb out of the shaft, but the smooth concrete walls provided no handholds, and her injuries made it impossible to reach the rusted remains of the ladder. Her radio couldn't transmit a signal from the underground location, and her voice couldn't carry to the surface through the narrow opening. The notebook entries showed Lisa's growing desperation as she realized her situation was hopeless. But, even facing certain death, she maintained her professionalism and dedication. Her final written words were instructions for other rangers about safety hazards she had observed during her patrol, and a message to her family expressing her love and asking them not to blame themselves for her fate. Other visitors stayed away from the area entirely, either because they were spooked by the story or because they didn't want to interfere with ongoing search efforts. The Whispering Creek Trail saw significantly fewer hikers during 2022 than in previous years, which hurt businesses that rented equipment or provided services to backpackers and day hikers. Some local people began to resent the attention that Lisa's disappearance brought to their community. They felt that the mystery overshadowed all the positive aspects of their beautiful forest and made their home seem dangerous and unwelcoming. Others appreciated that the case brought awareness to wilderness safety issues and the need for better resources for search and rescue operations. As the second anniversary of Lisa's disappearance approached in October 2022, her family organized a memorial service at the ranger station where she had worked. Rangers from across the state attended, along with search volunteers, community members, and people who had followed the case online. The service was both a celebration of Lisa's life and dedication to protecting the forest, and an acknowledgement that her fate might never be known. Jenny spoke about her sister's love for nature and her commitment to helping others enjoy the wilderness safely. She asked people to remember Lisa not just as a missing person, but as someone who had devoted her career to protecting the places and people she cared about. Detective Johnson attended the memorial service and spoke briefly about the ongoing investigation. He assured Lisa's family and friends that the case would never be truly closed, even if it remained officially inactive. He promised that any new information or evidence would be thoroughly investigated, no matter how much time had passed. As winter approached again, the case seemed to settle into a permanent state of uncertainty. Lisa had been gone for over a year, and despite all the resources and attention devoted to finding her, she remained as missing as the day she had first failed to make her radio check-in from Eagle's Rest campsite. The months following Lisa's disappearance brought changes that nobody expected. The tight-knit community of park rangers, who had always felt safe and confident in the wilderness, suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought. They knew about forest safety. Ranger headquarters implemented new safety protocols almost immediately. No more solo patrols in remote areas, especially not overnight trips. Rangers now had to work in pairs even for routine maintenance tasks that had been done alone for decades. GPS tracking devices became mandatory equipment, along with satellite communicators that could send emergency signals even from the deepest parts of the forest. The new rules made sense from a safety perspective, but they fundamentally changed how rangers did their jobs. Many of the older rangers who had worked alone in the wilderness for their entire careers found the constant companionship awkward and limiting. The forest had always been a place where they could find peace and solitude while doing work they loved. For Lisa's colleagues, the changes were a constant reminder of what had happened to her. Every time they strapped on a GPS tracker or tested their satellite communicator, they thought about how Lisa had followed all the safety procedures that existed at the time, yet still vanished without a trace. The Whispering Creek Trail was closed to the public for 6 months while investigators continued searching and analyzing the area. Local businesses that depended on hiking tourism weren't happy about the closure, but they understood the seriousness of the situation. Nobody wanted more people disappearing in the same area where Lisa had vanished. When the trail finally reopened in spring 2022, it came with new warning signs and requirements. Hikers had to register before entering the trail system and check out when they returned. Rangers posted additional warning signs about the importance of staying on marked trails and camping only in designated areas. The Eagles Rest campsite remained open, but many hikers chose to avoid it, preferring to camp at other locations along the trail. Lisa's sister, Jenny, refused to let her disappearance fade into the background. She took time off from her job as a teacher to organize search efforts and keep the case in the public eye. Jenny had always been close to Lisa, and she couldn't accept that her sister had simply vanished without explanation. Every weekend for months, Jenny organized volunteer search parties. She created detailed maps showing areas that hadn't been thoroughly searched, and recruited experienced hikers and outdoors enthusiasts to help comb through remote sections of forest. These volunteers didn't expect to find Lisa alive after so much time had passed, but they hoped to find some clue that might explain what had happened to her. The volunteer searches never found anything significant, but they served another important purpose. They kept Lisa's story alive in the community and showed that people still cared about finding answers. Jenny also started a social media page dedicated to Lisa's case, sharing photos and memories while asking people to stay alert for any information that might help solve the mystery. The family offered a reward of $50,000 for information leading to Lisa's discovery. This generated hundreds of tips and suggestions, but most of them were based on misunderstandings or wishful thinking. People reported seeing Lisa in distant cities, claimed to have had dreams about where she might be, or suggested elaborate theories about what might have happened to her. Detective Johnson and his team followed up on every credible tip, no matter how unlikely it seemed. They traveled to other states to investigate reported sightings, consulted with experts on missing person cases, and even looked into some of the more unusual theories about Lisa's disappearance. Nothing led to any real evidence or answers. The forest itself seemed to react to Lisa's absence in ways that troubled experienced rangers and wildlife experts. The area around Eagles Rest campsite remained unusually quiet, even months after her disappearance. Animals that had always been common in that section of forest became scarce. Deer trails that had been used for generations were abandoned. Even insects seemed to avoid the area. Rangers who had to patrol near Eagles Rest reported feeling uncomfortable and unsettled, though they couldn't explain exactly why. The unnatural silence that Lisa had noted in her final logbook entry continued to occur intermittently. Some rangers described it as feeling like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Bird watchers and wildlife photographers who visited the area noticed the same changes. Species that had nested in the Eagles Rest area for years moved their nesting sites to other locations. Squirrels and chipmunks that had always been active around the campsite seemed to have disappeared entirely. Even the plants looked different, less vibrant and healthy than they had been before Lisa's disappearance. Some people began to whisper about whether the area might be cursed or haunted, though most rangers and investigators dismissed such talk as superstition. Still, the observable changes to wildlife patterns were undeniable and disturbing. Something had shifted in the natural balance of that part of the forest, and it seemed to be related to Lisa's disappearance. Detective Johnson continued working on the case even after it was officially moved to inactive status. He couldn't let go of the puzzle, partly because of professional pride and partly because he had developed genuine respect for Lisa through his investigation into her life and character. She deserved to have her story told and her fate discovered. During the long winter months when outdoor searching was impossible, Johnson spent countless hours studying geological surveys and historical maps of the area. He developed a theory that there might be underground cave systems or old mine shafts that hadn't been properly documented. Perhaps Lisa had fallen through a hidden opening that had then collapsed and sealed itself. Ground-penetrating radar equipment was brought in during the spring of 2022 to scan the area around Eagles Rest. The technology could detect underground voids and cavities that might not be visible from the surface. The surveys covered several square miles around the campsite, looking for any underground features that might explain how someone could disappear so completely. The radar surveys found nothing unusual, just solid rock, dense root systems, and the normal underground features you would expect in an old-growth forest. There were no hidden caves, no abandoned mine shafts, no underground voids where a person might have fallen and become trapped. This lack of findings was actually more disturbing than discovering a hidden cave would have been. It meant that whatever had happened to Lisa couldn't be explained by any obvious physical feature of the landscape. The mystery deepened rather than being solved. Internet communities dedicated to unsolved mysteries and missing person cases became fascinated with Lisa's disappearance. True crime podcasters discussed every detail of the case, sometimes spending hours analyzing the timeline of events and speculating about what might have happened during those crucial hours when Lisa vanished. Online amateur detectives proposed theories ranging from reasonable to bizarre. Some suggested that Lisa had suffered a medical emergency and wandered away from the campsite in a confused state. Others proposed that she had been attacked by a wild animal that had somehow disposed of all evidence. A few people even suggested explanations involving everything from underground alien bases to dimensional portals. While most of these theories were clearly far-fetched, the online attention did serve a useful purpose. It kept Lisa's case visible to thousands of people across the country, any of whom might have information that could help solve the mystery. Detective Johnson actually received several useful tips from people who had learned about the case through podcasts or online forums. The case also attracted the attention of researchers who studied missing person cases in wilderness areas. They noted that Lisa's disappearance fit a pattern that occurred in national forests and parks across the country. Experienced outdoors people vanishing without a trace in areas where disappearances shouldn't be possible. These researchers had documented hundreds of similar cases over the years, each with the same baffling characteristics: no evidence left behind, no logical explanation for the disappearance, and often occurring in areas with unusual histories of missing persons. Lisa's case became part of a larger database of unexplained wilderness disappearances that researchers hoped might eventually reveal some common factor. Local businesses experienced mixed effects from the attention Lisa's case brought to the area. Some visitors came specifically because they had heard about the mystery and wanted to see eagles rest for themselves. These people were often disappointed to find that the campsite looked completely normal and unremarkable. 3 different hikers who had used nearby trails during that week mentioned feeling like they were being watched while walking through the forest. All of them described the same unsettling sensation of invisible eyes following their movements, even though they never saw anyone else in the woods. Several people reported experiencing the same unnatural silence that Lisa had documented. A group of birdwatchers mentioned that their usual spot near Whispering Creek had become completely quiet, with no bird activity for several days around the time Lisa disappeared. As autumn turned to winter, the search efforts had to be scaled back due to dangerous weather conditions. Snow began falling in the higher elevations, making it impossible for search teams to continue combing the forest safely. The case remained officially open and active, but with no new leads to pursue. Detective Johnson found himself obsessed with the case during the long winter months. He spent countless hours studying maps of the area, looking for cave systems, old mine shafts, or other underground features that might explain how someone could disappear so completely. Ground-penetrating radar surveys were conducted in the Afuajayar spring, but revealed only solid rock and dense root systems beneath the forest floor. The mystery of Lisa's disappearance had become something more than just another missing person case. It represented a puzzle that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about how people vanish in wilderness areas. Despite all the technology, expertise, and resources devoted to finding her, Lisa had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only questions that seemed impossible to answer. When Lisa failed to make her scheduled radio check-in at 8 p.m., the dispatcher at headquarters wasn't immediately worried. Radio dead zones were common in the deep forest, and experienced rangers like Lisa sometimes got delayed by trail conditions or equipment issues. The protocol was to wait until morning before raising any alarms. But when 6 a.m. came and went without any word from Lisa, the atmosphere at the ranger station changed completely. She had never missed a morning check-in before, not once in 12 years of service. The station supervisor tried calling her radio every 30 minutes, but heard only static in response. By 8 a.m., it became clear that something was seriously wrong. Lisa should have been hiking back toward headquarters by now, and her radio silence was completely out of character. The decision was made to launch an immediate search and rescue operation, even though it meant pulling rangers from other duties across the region. The first rescue team reached Eagle's Rest campsite by early afternoon, hiking the trail as fast as safely possible. What they found there made no sense at all. Lisa's campsite looked exactly as if she had just stepped away for a few minutes and would be back any moment. Her tent was still properly set up and secured. Her sleeping bag was neatly arranged inside, clearly unused. The picnic table held her remaining food supplies, eating utensils, and her official logbook, everything organized with the precision that Lisa was known for. Most puzzling of all, her dinner from the night before sat half-finished on the table, as if she had been interrupted while eating. The first ranger to examine the scene called out Lisa's name repeatedly, hoping she might be nearby gathering firewood or getting water from the stream. The forest remained completely silent. No response, no movement, no sign that anyone else was in the area. It was as if Lisa had simply vanished into thin air. When more rescue teams arrived, they began a systematic search of the immediate area around Eagle's Rest. They looked for any possible clues about what might have happened to Lisa. Footprints, torn clothing, signs of a struggle, blood, broken branches, anything that might explain her disappearance. The most experienced tracker on the team spent hours studying the ground around the campsite. He found Lisa's boot prints leading from her tent to the picnic table, from the table to the fire ring, and around the general camping area, but nowhere could he find any prints leading away from the campsite into the surrounding forest. This was the first major clue that something very strange had happened. People don't just disappear without leaving footprints, especially someone wearing heavy hiking boots on soft forest soil. The tracker examined every inch of ground within 100 yards of the camp, but found absolutely no evidence that Lisa had walked away from the area. The discovery that really shocked everyone was Lisa's duty belt, hanging exactly where it should be on the pine tree branch. Her radio was still attached and functioning perfectly when they tested it. Her flashlight, first aid supplies, and other essential equipment were all accounted for. Most importantly, her service weapon was still in its holster, undisturbed. No ranger would ever venture into the dark forest without their essential gear, especially not Lisa, who was known for following safety procedures to the letter. The fact that she had left all her equipment behind suggested that whatever happened had been sudden and unexpected. The rescue teams expanded their search in wider and wider circles around Eagle's Rest. They called Lisa's name continuously, hoping she might be injured somewhere nearby and unable to respond loudly. They checked every fallen log she might have crawled under for shelter, every rocky outcrop where she might have taken refuge, every stream where she might have gone for water. As word of Lisa's disappearance spread, more help arrived. Off-duty rangers drove in from stations hundreds of miles away. Local volunteer firefighters joined the search. Experienced hikers and outdoors enthusiasts offered their services. Within 48 hours, over 200 people were combing the forest, looking for any trace of the missing ranger. Search helicopters flew overhead, their crews scanning the forest canopy with binoculars and cameras. The helicopter pilots were experts at spotting people from the air, but they saw nothing unusual in the dense woods below. No bright-colored clothing, no reflective equipment, no signs of anyone moving through the trees. Specially trained search. Dogs were brought in to follow Lisa's scent. These dogs had successfully found missing people in wilderness areas many times before. But when they reached Eagle's Rest campsite, something strange happened. The dogs could clearly detect Lisa's scent around the camping area, but they became confused and agitated when asked to track her beyond that point. The lead dog handler had never seen anything like it. The dogs would circle the campsite clearly, picking up Lisa's scent, but when they reached the edges of the camping area, they would stop and whine. It was as if Lisa's scent trail simply ended at the boundary of the campsite, with no indication of which direction she might have gone. Thermal imaging equipment was brought in to scan the forest from helicopters. This technology could detect body heat from people hiding under dense forest cover even during the day. The thermal cameras found several deer, a few bears, and various smaller animals. but no human heat signatures anywhere in the search area. By the end of the first week, the official search area covered over 50 square miles of dense forest. Every trail, every stream, every possible hiding place had been thoroughly examined. The searchers had found absolutely nothing: no clothing, no personal items, no footprints, no disturbance of vegetation. It was as if Lisa had never existed. The case was officially transferred to the county sheriff's department when it became clear that this wasn't a simple missing person situation. Detective Johnson, who had handled dozens of missing person cases over his 20-year career, took charge of the investigation. He had never encountered anything quite like this before. Johnson's first step was to thoroughly investigate Lisa's personal life, looking for any possible explanation for her disappearance. What he found was a woman with absolutely no reason to vanish voluntarily. Lisa had no debts, no relationship problems, no history of depression or mental health issues. Her bank accounts were in good order, her bills were paid, and she had been looking forward to upcoming family gatherings. Her sister Jenny provided phone records showing their last conversation, which had taken place just 2 days before Lisa's patrol. The conversation was completely normal and upbeat. Lisa had been excited about the beautiful autumn weather and mentioned how much she was looking forward to the peaceful solo hike through her favorite section of forest. Johnson interviewed every person who knew Lisa well: her fellow rangers, her neighbors, her family members, and her few close friends. Everyone described her the same way: responsible, reliable, deeply connected to nature, and completely dedicated to her job. None of them could imagine any scenario where Lisa would abandon her post or disappear voluntarily. The detective's investigation took an interesting turn when he began looking into the history of the Eagles Rest area. What he discovered was disturbing and puzzling. Lisa wasn't the first person to disappear from this specific section of forest. Going back through old case files and newspaper archives, Johnson found records of 5 other disappearances over the past 30 years, all within a 3-mile radius of Eagles Rest campsite. Each case shared the same baffling characteristics: experienced outdoors people who knew the area well, no logical explanation for their disappearance, and absolutely no physical evidence left behind. In 1995, an experienced hunter had vanished during a solo hunting trip. His truck was found at a trailhead 2 miles from Eagles Rest, but he was never seen again. In 2003, a married couple celebrating their anniversary with a backpacking trip disappeared somewhere along the Whispering Creek Trail. Their abandoned campsite showed no signs of struggle or disturbance. The most recent case before Lisa had occurred in 2018, when a wildlife photographer working on a book about Oregon forests went missing. His expensive camera equipment was found neatly arranged at a campsite near Eagles Rest, but he had vanished without a trace. Johnson reached out to local tribal elders, hoping they might have knowledge about the area that wasn't recorded in official documents. The elders were initially reluctant to discuss the matter with an outsider, but eventually shared some disturbing information. According to tribal oral history, certain sections of the forest had always been considered dangerous during specific times of the year. The elders spoke about places where the forest went quiet and warned people to stay away during these periods. They described the silence that Lisa had noted in her final logbook entry as a sign that something unnatural was present in the woods. The investigation also turned up some interesting witness reports from people who had been in the area around the time of Lisa's disappearance. A local hunter reported seeing strange lights moving through the forest canopy on the evening of October 15th. He described them as blue-white orbs that moved in patterns unlike any flashlights or natural phenomena he had ever seen. She walked over to a large pine tree near her tent and hung her ranger belt on a low branch, the way she always did when setting up camp. Her radio, flashlight, and other essential equipment were all easily accessible, but safely secured. This was standard procedure that she had followed hundreds of times before. As darkness began to fall, Lisa built up her fire a little higher than usual. The warm light pushed back the shadows and made the campsite feel more normal and welcoming. She sat on a log near the fire and tried to relax, telling herself that tomorrow morning she would laugh about how silly she had been to let a quiet forest make her nervous. The time for her scheduled radio check-in was approaching quickly. Lisa looked forward to hearing another human voice and reporting that everything was fine at Eagle's Rest. She planned to mention the unusual silence again, but otherwise had nothing concerning to report. The patrol was going smoothly, and she would complete the loop trail tomorrow as planned. Lisa opened her logbook one more time and wrote a final entry for the day. She noted the time as 6:30 p.m. and wrote that she had arrived safely at Eagle's Rest campsite. Her last written words described how the forest silence continued, but that she was settling in for a peaceful night and looked forward to completing the patrol successfully. She closed the logbook and set it on the picnic table, then walked over to get her radio for the evening check-in call. Lisa had no way of knowing that these would be the last words she would ever write, or that within hours she would vanish completely without a trace, leaving behind one of the most baffling mysteries in the history of the National Forest Service. The morning of October 15, 2021 started like any other day at the ranger station in Oregon's deep forest. The air was crisp and cool, with that special smell of pine trees and morning dew that only comes in autumn. Lisa had been working as a park ranger for 12 long years, and she knew these woods like the back of her hand. At 34 years old, Lisa was one of those people who truly belonged in nature. She could tell you which birds were singing just by their calls, identify animal, tracks in mud that most people wouldn't even notice, and navigate through thick forest without a map. Her fellow rangers often joked that she had roots instead of feet, since she seemed more comfortable among the trees than anywhere else. That morning, Lisa was preparing for a routine patrol of the Whispering Creek Trail. This wasn't just any trail. It was a 15-mile loop that wound deep into the forest, far from roads and other people. The trail was so remote that rangers had to camp overnight when they patrolled it, since walking the entire loop in one day would be nearly impossible. Lisa had done this patrol countless times before. She knew every twist and turn of the path, every stream crossing and every rocky outcrop along the way. The routine was always the same. Pack her gear, check her radio, fill out the patrol log, and head into the wilderness. She would spend one night at a designated camping spot called Eagle's Rest, then complete the loop and return the next day. Her supervisor watched as she loaded her backpack with the usual supplies: sleeping bag, tent, first aid kit, water purification, tablets, emergency flares, and enough food for 2 days. Lisa was known for being extremely careful and well-prepared. She never took risks or cut corners when it came to safety. Before leaving, Lisa tested her radio equipment twice. The radio was her lifeline to the outside world, especially since cell phone signals couldn't reach most parts of the trail. She was required to check in at specific times and locations, letting the station know she was safe and reporting any problems she encountered. The weather forecast looked perfect for the patrol: clear skies, mild temperatures, and no chance of rain. Lisa smiled as she adjusted her ranger hat and started walking toward the trailhead. She loved these solo patrols, even though they could be lonely. There was something peaceful about being alone in the forest, listening to the sounds of nature and feeling completely connected to the wilderness. As she walked into the forest, Lisa noticed how beautiful everything looked in the autumn light. The leaves were changing colors, creating a carpet of gold and brown on the forest floor. Squirrels were busy gathering nuts for winter, and birds were singing their morning songs high in the trees above. The first few hours of the patrol went exactly as planned. Lisa walked at a steady pace, stopping occasionally to check her map and make notes in her logbook. She recorded everything she saw: any damaged trail signs, fallen trees blocking the path, unusual animal behavior, or evidence of illegal camping. This information helped the Park Service maintain the trails and keep visitors safe. Around noon, Lisa reached the first official checkpoint. She pulled out her radio and called back to headquarters. Her voice crackled through the static as she reported her position and confirmed that everything was normal. The dispatcher acknowledged her report and reminded her to check in again from Lookout Point later that afternoon. As Lisa continued hiking, she began to notice something strange. The forest was gradually becoming quieter. At first, she didn't think much of it. Animal activity naturally changes throughout the day, and experienced rangers learn to recognize these patterns. But as the hours passed, the silence became more noticeable and unsettling. By mid-afternoon, Lisa realized she hadn't heard a single bird call in over an hour. No squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing, no rustling in the bushes from small animals moving around. The forest had become completely silent except for the sound of her own footsteps on the trail. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing through the trees. Lisa had never experienced anything quite like this in all her years as a ranger. Forests are usually full of life and sound, even when they appear empty to casual observers. Complete. Silence was unnatural and made her feel uneasy, though she couldn't quite explain why. She stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening carefully. The silence was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. It felt as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lisa shook her head and tried to dismiss the feeling as silly, but she couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. When she reached Lookout Point around 4:30 in the afternoon, Lisa was actually relieved to use her radio again. Hearing another human voice would help break the oppressive silence that had been following her for hours. She called in right on schedule at exactly 4:47 p.m. Her radio transmission was clear and professional, just like always. She reported her position, confirmed she was on schedule to reach Eagles Rest campsite by 7 p.m., and mentioned that weather conditions remained good. But then she added something unusual. Lisa told the dispatcher that the forest seemed unusually quiet today, with very little animal activity. She said it was probably nothing to worry about, but worth noting in case other rangers reported similar observations. The dispatcher acknowledged her report and confirmed they would expect her evening check-in call around 8 p.m. from Eagles Rest. Lisa packed up her radio and continued hiking toward the campsite, hoping the strange silence would break soon. The trail from Lookout Point to Eagles Rest was familiar and easy to follow. Lisa had walked this section so many times that she could probably do it with her eyes closed. But today, something felt different. The silence continued, and it seemed to be getting thicker and more oppressive with each step she took. As the sun began to set, Lisa finally reached Eagles Rest campsite. It was a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees, with a designated fire ring and a wooden picnic table that had been there for decades. A small stream bubbled nearby, providing fresh water for campers. On any normal evening, this would be a peaceful and welcoming place to spend the night. Lisa went through her usual camping routine with practiced efficiency. She set up her tent in the designated spot, arranged her sleeping bag inside, and organized her gear on the picnic table. Everything had to be neat and secure, both for safety reasons and because she took pride in maintaining professional standards even when alone in the wilderness. She started a small fire in the ring and began preparing her dinner, a simple meal of canned soup and crackers that would give her energy for the next day's hike. As she waited for the soup to heat up, Lisa pulled out her logbook and began writing her daily entries. Her handwriting was neat and precise as she recorded the day's observations, distance traveled, trail conditions, weather, and wildlife sightings. Or in this case, the lack of wildlife sightings. She spent several minutes writing about the unusual silence, trying to describe exactly what made it feel so different from normal quiet periods in the forest. Lisa looked at her watch and saw it was 6:30 p.m. She had arrived at camp earlier than expected, which gave her extra time to rest before her scheduled radio check-in. She continued writing in her logbook, documenting everything she could think of that might be relevant to other rangers or researchers. As she wrote, Lisa found herself glancing up frequently to scan the tree line around the campsite. She told herself this was just normal ranger caution, but deep down she knew it was because the silence was making her nervous. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't identify what it was. The soup finally finished heating, and Lisa sat down at the picnic table to eat her dinner. She tried to enjoy the meal and the beautiful sunset filtering through the trees, but the oppressive quiet made it difficult to relax. Even the crackling of her small fire seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. After finishing half her soup, Lisa suddenly felt too restless to keep eating. She stood up and walked around the campsite, checking and double-checking her gear. Her tent was secure, her backpack was properly organized, and her radio was ready for the evening check-in call. Everything was exactly as it should be. But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that invisible eyes were watching her from the dark spaces between the trees. She had experienced this sensation before during solo camping trips, and usually she could ignore it as a normal psychological response to being alone in the wilderness. Tonight felt different somehow.